Hello, and welcome back to Reddit Confessions. She left her shoes by the door. The black ankle boots she never wears unless she's planning to be out for a while. The laces were still perfectly tied, like she'd slipped them off in a hurry the night before. I remember standing there, staring at them, wondering why they were here, but she wasn't. The apartment was too quiet. Her coat was gone from the hook, her phone charger still plugged into the wall, and the half-empty coffee cup from yesterday sat on the counter with lipstick on the rim. She'd left without that charger, and she never leaves without it. That's when I checked the clock. 21 hours. That's how long it had been since I last saw her. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe she'd stayed with a friend. Maybe she just needed space. But my gut wouldn't let it go. Every creak of the floor, every sound from the street, made me think she was finally coming back. And then, when I'd realized it was nothing, the weight in my chest got heavier. At hour 24, I stopped pacing. I stopped checking my phone every 30 seconds. I stopped hoping. I packed my bag. No dramatic note, no confrontation. I just folded my clothes into a suitcase, zipped it up, and walked out without locking the door. Because by then, I wasn't wondering where she'd gone. I was wondering why it had taken me this long to leave. When I stepped out of the building, the air felt heavier than it should have for a clear morning. My suitcase wheels rattled against the uneven sidewalk, each bump echoing in my head like a question I didn't want answered. I wasn't walking toward anywhere specific. I just knew I couldn't stay in that apartment one more night, staring at the door like a dog waiting for an owner who'd already moved on. But distance didn't stop my mind from working. I kept replaying every detail of the past week, searching for something I'd missed. 3 days before she vanished, she'd gotten a package she didn't let me open. When I asked, she brushed it off with a just work stuff. She doesn't work anywhere that sends packages. The night before she left, her phone kept buzzing while she was in the shower, and when I picked it up from the counter to hand it to her, the screen was locked. Something she'd never bothered to do before. By the time I reached the bus station, I was shaking. Not from fear, but from the realization that her disappearing wasn't random. I bought the cheapest one-way ticket I could find, just to put more miles between me and the questions clawing at me. The waiting area smelled like burnt coffee and tired people, and I was one of them. Tired of pretending things were fine, tired of telling myself I was imagining the distance between us when it had been growing like a crack in the wall for months. As I sat there, a woman across from me was talking loudly on the phone, complaining about her boyfriend lying to her. Every word hit me harder than it should have, because I realized I'd been living with the possibility of lies for longer than I wanted to admit. My wife didn't just vanish for 24 hours. She'd been disappearing piece by piece, day by day, right in front of me. And the worst part? I still didn't know if I wanted her to call, or if I was terrified she actually would. The bus ride was long enough for my nerves to settle into a dull ache. I stared out the window at towns I didn't know, watching gas stations, diners, and empty parking lots blur together. But no matter how far we went, my mind stayed trapped in that apartment, circling the same thought. She had to be with someone. The signs were all there, and I'd been too spineless to confront them. When we stopped in a small city 2 hours away, I checked into a budget motel, the kind with flickering neon signs and carpets that smelled faintly of mildew. I told myself I'd get some rest, maybe even think clearly in the morning. But then I made the mistake of checking my phone. There were no missed calls, no texts from her. But there was something else. A notification from our shared cloud account. She must have forgotten to unlink her phone. I opened it before I could talk myself out of it. There it was. A photo timestamped less than 12 hours after she'd left. She was in a dimly lit restaurant I'd never seen before, sitting across from a man I didn't recognize. Her head was tilted, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. His hand was halfway across the table, fingers brushing hers. I felt my stomach drop so hard I had to sit down. The worst part wasn't even the picture. It was the caption she'd sent him, still attached in the upload. Finally, just us. I stared at that message for what felt like an hour, the words burning into me. There was no misunderstanding this. She wasn't running errands. She wasn't with family. She was with him. And suddenly, those 24 hours weren't just about where she'd gone. They were about everything she'd taken with her. My trust, my dignity, my ability to believe that I mattered to her at all. I could have called her right then, demanded answers, yelled, begged. But I didn't. I just put the phone down on the bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the motel ice machine outside my door. It was the first time in my life I realized silence can be louder than screaming. And deep down, in a place I didn't want to admit existed, I started to think. Maybe I wasn't planning on going back at all. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the stiff motel bed with the glow of the streetlights spilling in through the half-broken blinds, my mind replaying that photo over and over until it felt carved into the inside of my skull. At some point, I realized I wasn't even angry in the way I thought I'd be. I wasn't pacing or punching walls. I was just hollow, like someone had scooped out every part of me that cared and left the shell behind to watch it all fall apart. Around 5 in the morning, my phone started ringing. The number wasn't saved, but I knew it was her. She's the only person who calls me that early without warning. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the green button, my chest tightening with every second it buzzed. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. Ernest? Where are you? I didn't answer right away, partly because I wanted her to feel the weight of the silence, and partly because I didn't trust myself not to crack. She asked again, this time sharper. You weren't home. I came back and you were just gone. That word back caught in my ears. She said it like I'd been the one who'd vanished, like she hadn't disappeared for an entire day without a word. I told her I knew. About the photo. About the man. About the caption. The pause on the other end was so long I thought she'd hung up, but then she let out this shaky laugh that made my stomach twist. It's not what you think, she said, the oldest, weakest excuse in the book. I just needed to talk to someone. We were catching up. I didn't want to upset you. Catching up? With a stranger's hand over hers and a message that read finally. Just us? I almost laughed too, but it would have come out wrong. Instead, I told her I wasn't coming back. At least not right now. She immediately shifted from soft to frantic, her words tumbling over each other. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about what I'd do with what I knew. She kept saying we could work this out, like we were haggling over a car price and not the wreckage of our marriage. But the more she spoke, the more I realized she wasn't apologizing. She was managing, trying to control the damage. And in that moment, something inside me finally snapped in a quiet, almost polite way. I told her she'd already had her 24 hours without me. I was going to take my own now. Then I hung up before she could answer. The phone slipped out of my hand onto the bed, and I just sat there, staring at the wall, wondering how long I'd been fooling myself into thinking I actually knew the person I married. After hanging up, I sat there for what felt like hours, the hum of the old motel heater filling the room. I told myself I wouldn't think about her, wouldn't replay the conversation in my head, but every word she'd said had a different tone when I dissected it. She hadn't asked if I was okay. She hadn't asked if I'd eaten, if I was safe, if I was coming home. Her only focus had been figuring out how much I knew and how much damage it could cause. That alone told me more than any confession ever could. I got up to make coffee, but my hands were shaking too much to pour it without spilling. I sat back on the bed and picked up my phone, not to call her, but to open the shared cloud account again. If she'd uploaded that one picture by mistake, there might be more. My gut told me I was right, and I hated myself for being so sure. Scrolling through the new uploads, I saw a series of photos taken in quick bursts. Most were blurry, probably taken without much thought. One showed the man leaning in close, his lips near her ear. Another caught her laughing. Not the polite laugh she gave me at home, but the full one, with her head back, her eyes almost closed. Then there was a video, less than 10 seconds long, but enough to hear her voice saying, "This is the best day I've had in years. Years. Not weeks. Not months. Years." She'd said that while holding someone else's hand, sitting in some restaurant I'd never been to, during the 24 hours she'd been missing. My throat went dry, and I played the clip again, just to make sure I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't. I didn't even know what hurt more, the fact that she'd found happiness without me, or that she'd felt the need to hide it so completely. Maybe both. But what really cut deep was realizing that while I'd been pacing the living room that night, staring at the door and hoping she'd walk through it, she'd been somewhere else entirely, building a memory I was never meant to be part of. I closed the app and tossed the phone on the bed, but the images were burned into my mind. I wanted to forget them, to wipe my head clean, but the more I tried, the more they cemented themselves. I thought about calling her again, demanding she tell me the truth from start to finish, but what would that do? She'd lie. She'd soften the edges, twist the story until it was just blurry enough for me to doubt my own instincts. And that's when it hit me. The only person I could trust in all of this was myself, and I was done letting her rewrite my reality. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to follow her back into that apartment. I was going to follow the trail she'd left, the one she didn't even realize was there, until I knew the full story. And I had a feeling the truth was going to be a lot worse than just one dinner with a stranger. The next morning, I woke before the sun, my mind buzzing with the decision I'd made. If she could disappear for 24 hours without explanation, then I could take the same liberty to find out exactly where she'd been. I didn't have much to go on, just the photos, the video, and the faint reflection of a street sign in the background of one of the shots. It wasn't clear, but I knew the area well enough to take a guess. I zoomed in until the image pixelated into a blur, and then I saw it, part of the name, just enough for me to recognize it. It was from a district she'd never had any reason to visit. I packed my bag, checked out of the motel, and rented the cheapest car I could find. The drive took me through stretches of highway I'd never traveled, past boarded-up shops and diners that looked like they hadn't served a meal in years. The district was on the far edge of the city, a place with low-lit streets and businesses that looked closed even when they were open. I found the restaurant from the photo easily. The green awning and crooked neon sign matched perfectly. When I stepped inside, the place was almost empty. The air smelled faintly of old wine and grease, and the floorboards creaked under my shoes. A woman behind the counter gave me the kind of bored glance people reserve for strangers they'll never see again. I told her I was meeting someone and scanned the room. There was a corner booth near the back, the same one from the photo. I could picture her there, leaning forward with that laugh I hadn't heard in years, her fingers brushing across the table to meet his. I slid into the booth and just sat there, letting the space breathe around me. That's when I noticed something strange. Carved into the wood at the edge of the table, there were initials, hers and another set I didn't recognize. Not fresh, but not old either. My heart thudded as I traced them with my finger. This wasn't the first time they'd been here together. This place wasn't random. It was theirs. I didn't know whether to feel sick or furious. I ordered a coffee just to have an excuse to sit longer, trying to imagine the conversations they'd had here. The stolen moments. The little rituals. Every couple has their spot. And now I knew they had one too. My mind kept drifting to that video, the best day I've had in years. How many best days had they shared without me knowing? When I left, I didn't feel like I'd found closure. I felt like I'd just stepped into a deeper part of something I didn't understand. She hadn't just cheated me out of honesty. She'd built a whole world where I didn't exist. And for the first time since she vanished, I realized that if I wanted answers, I couldn't just wait for them to surface. I was going to have to tear that world apart, piece by piece, until there was nowhere left for her to hide. I drove away from that restaurant with the image of those carved initials burning in my mind, my fingers still tingling from tracing them. I knew hers instantly. The looping S and sharp H were unmistakable. But the other set was a mystery, and I couldn't stop wondering who they belonged to. I kept repeating them in my head like a code I needed to crack. M. L. I figured it had to be a man's initials, but that didn't narrow things down much. Still, I wasn't going to let it rest. Back at the motel, I pulled out my laptop and started digging. I searched the restaurant's tagged location on social media, scrolling through countless blurry photos of plates of pasta and half-empty wine glasses. Then, in a post from about 3 months ago, I saw her in the background of someone else's picture. She wasn't looking at the camera, but her body language was unmistakable. leaning across the table toward a man whose back was to me. The caption mentioned Marcus, in a tag that linked to a private account. Marcus L. My heart skipped. L. Wasn't just some random engraving. It was him. I didn't know how they knew each other, but I was certain now that this wasn't some recent fling. If their initials were literally etched into that table, this had been going on long enough for them to feel like marking their territory. I clicked on the Marcus profile, and though it was private, the profile picture was enough to make me freeze. I recognized him, not from my own life, but from a story she'd once told me years ago, about an old friend who used to work with her at her first job. She'd mentioned him so casually back then, like he was just a name in a long-forgotten chapter of her life. I never heard about him again, or so I thought. I sat there in the dim motel light, my chest tightening as the pieces began to slot together. He wasn't new. He wasn't accidental. He was the reason for the late nights she had to work, the weekend trips to visit her cousin, the sudden mood swings when I asked too many questions. This wasn't some impulsive, one-off betrayal. This was a second life she'd been living right under my nose. I leaned back, staring at the cracked ceiling, and realized something that made my stomach twist. If she'd been able to keep this from me for this long, then her disappearing for 24 hours might not have been a slip-up at all. It might have been a test, to see if I'd break, if I'd finally confront her. And she'd underestimated me in the worst way, because now I wasn't just suspicious. I was certain. Tomorrow I'd find him. Not to start a fight, not to make a scene. I'm not that kind of man. But I needed to look him in the eye, to see for myself the person she'd been willing to throw away everything for. And maybe, just maybe, I'd make sure he knew exactly what he'd been part of. The next morning, I found him. Marcus was sitting outside a small cafe, sipping coffee like he didn't have a care in the world. I almost turned around right then, but something in me, maybe the last scrap of self-respect I had, told me to keep walking. I approached the table, and when he looked up, I saw a flicker of recognition. He knew exactly who I was. I didn't yell. I didn't even sit down. I just told him I knew everything, the restaurant, the initials, the years of lies. He didn't deny it, but he didn't look smug either. Instead, he said something I'll never forget. She told me you'd never leave. That was it. That one sentence hit me harder than any confession could. She had been so sure I'd stick around no matter what she did. So certain that I'd keep swallowing the excuses and pretending not to notice. And for a long time, she was right. But not anymore. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. I just turned and walked away, feeling lighter with every step. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was relief. Relief that I didn't have to keep living in the half-life she'd built for me. Relief that I could finally stop waiting by the door, wondering if she'd come home. Weeks later, I'm in a small apartment of my own. It's nothing special, but it's mine. I make my own coffee, I leave my shoes wherever I want, and I don't spend my nights staring at a phone that will never ring. I'm not saying it doesn't hurt. It does. But the hurt is clean now. It's healing, not rotting in the dark. If she ever wonders where I went, I hope she realizes it wasn't just about the 24 hours she disappeared. It was about the years before that, the ones where I disappeared piece by piece without even noticing. And now, for the first time in a long time, I'm starting to feel like I'm actually here again. So that's my story. If you've ever had a moment where you finally decided you were done, where you chose yourself over someone who kept taking, I'd like to hear about it. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching Reddit Confessions.